The second discourse, concerning the four species of elementaries, the sylphs, the undines, or nymphs, the gnomes, and the salamanders. The Comte wished me to pass the entire night in prayer, and the next morning at daybreak sent a note to say that he would be at my house at 8 o'clock, and that, if agreeable to me, we would make an excursion together. I awaited him. He came, and after we had exchanged greetings, he said, "Let us go to some place where we may be alone, and where our interview cannot be interrupted." I told him I thought Rouen a pleasant place and rather unfrequented. "Let us go there, then," he replied. We got into the coach, and during the drive I kept studying my new master. I have never in my life remarked in anyone so great a depth of contentment as was apparent in all that he said and did. His mind was more open and tranquil than it seemed possible for that of a sorcerer to be. His entire air was in no wise that of a man whose conscience reproaches him with black deeds, and I felt a marvelous impatience to have him enter upon the subject of our interview, for I could not comprehend how a man, seemingly so judicious and so perfect in every other way, could have let his mind become unbalanced by the vision to which I had perceived him to be subject on the preceding day. He discoursed divinely on political economy, and was enchanted to hear that I had read what Plato has written on the subject. "Some day you will have a greater need of all that than you imagine," he said, "and if we come to an agreement today, it is not impossible that you may in time put these sages' maxims into practice." We were just entering Rouen and went to the garden, but the Comte disdained to admire its beauties and made straight for the labyrinth. Perceiving that we were as much alone as he could desire, he raised his hands and eyes to heaven and cried aloud, "I praise the eternal wisdom for inspiring me to conceal from you none of her ineffable truth. How happy you will be, my son, if she is gracious enough to put into your soul the resolutions which these high mysteries require of you. Soon you will learn to command all nature. God alone will be your master, and only the sages your equals. The supreme intelligence will glory in obeying your desire. The demons will not dare to be found where you are. Your voice will make them tremble in the depth of the abyss, and all the invisible people who dwell in the four elements will deem themselves happy to be the ministers of your pleasure. I worship thee, Almighty God, because thou hast crowned man with such great glory, and hast created him sovereign monarch of all the works of thy hands. My son," he added, turning toward me, "do you feel within yourself the heroic ambition which is the infallible characteristic of the children of wisdom? Do you dare seek to serve God alone and to master all that is not of God? Do you understand what it means to be a man? And are you not weary of being a slave when you were born to be a sovereign? And if you have these noble thoughts, which the map of your horoscope does not permit me to doubt, consider seriously whether you will have the courage and strength to renounce anything which might prove an obstacle to your attaining that eminence for which you were born." He paused and looked at me fixedly, as if either awaiting my reply or seeking to read my heart. From the beginning of this discourse I had greatly hoped that we would soon enter upon the subject of our interview, but at these last words I gave up all anticipation of doing so. The word renounce frightened me, and I no longer doubted he was about to propose that I should renounce either baptism or paradise. So, not knowing how to get out of the difficult situation in which I found myself, I said, "Renounce? Sir, is it necessary to renounce anything?" "It is absolutely necessary," he answered, "and truly, so vitally essential that it is for the first thing required of one. I do not know whether you can make up your mind to it, but I know only too well that wisdom never dwells in a body subject to sin, even as she never enters a soul repossessed by error or malice. The sages will never admit you to their order if you do not from this moment renounce one thing which can never go hand in hand with wisdom. It is necessary," he added in a whisper, bending close to my ear. "It is necessary to renounce all sensual relationships with women." I burst out laughing at this absurd proposal. "Sir," I exclaimed, "you have let me off easily. I was expecting to propose some extraordinary renunciation. But since you merely desire me to renounce women, that was done long ago. I am chaste enough, thank God. Nevertheless, sir, since Solomon was more of a sage than I may ever be, and since all his wisdom could not prevent his becoming corrupted, pray tell me how you gentlemen manage to do without the other sex. And why would it be inconvenient if in the philosopher's paradise every Adam should have its Eve?" "You are asking me something very important," he replied, as if reflecting whether or not he should answer my question. "Since I see, however, that you disengage yourself without difficulty from the society of the fair sex, I will tell you one reason which have compelled all sages to exact this condition from their disciples. Forthwith you will perceive in that ignorance all men live who are not of our number. When you have been enrolled among the children of the philosophers, and when your eyes have been strengthened by the use of the very holy medicine, you will straightway discover that the elements are inhabited by most perfect beings. Unhappy Adam's sin has deprived his unfortunate posterity of all knowledge of these beings and of all intercourse with them. The immense space which lies between earth and heaven has inhabitants far nobler than the birds and insects. These vast seas have far other hosts than those of the dolphins and whales. The depth of the earth are not for the moles alone, and the element of fire, nobler than the other three, was not created to remain useless and empty. The air is full of an innumerable multitude of peoples, whose faces are human, seemingly rather haughty, yet in reality tractable, great lovers of the sciences, cunning, obliging to the sages, enemies of fools and the ignorant. Their wives and daughters have a masculine beauty like that of the Amazons. "Why, sir," I ejaculated, "do you mean to tell me that these hobgoblins are married?" "Now, don't be upset by such a trifle, my son," he rejoined. "Believe me, everything that I am telling you is sound and true. These are but the elements of the ancient Kabbalah, and it only rests with you to verify my statements with your own eyes. Receive with a submissive spirit the light which God sends you through my mediation. Forget all you may have heard on this subject in the schools of the ignorant, or later, when convinced by experience, you will have the sorrow of being compelled to own that you persisted stubbornly in the wrong. Hear me to the end and know that the seas and rivers are inhabited as well as the air. The ancient sages called this race of people undines, or nymphs. There are very few males among them, but a great number of females. Their beauty is extreme, and the daughters of men are not to be compared with them. The earth is filled well nigh to its center with gnomes, people of slight stature, who are the guardians of treasures, minerals, and precious stones. They are ingenious, friends of man, and easy to govern. They furnish the children of the sages with all the money they require, and as the price of their service ask not, save the glory of being commanded. The Nomids, their wives, are small but very amiable, and their dress is exceedingly curious. As for the salamanders, flaming dwellers of the region of fire, they serve the philosophers, but do not seek their company eagerly, and their daughters and wives rarely show themselves. "They do right," I interrupted, "and I had rather have their room than their company." "Why so?" inquired the Comte. "Why so, sir?" I replied. "Who would care to converse with such an ugly beast as a salamander, male or female?" "You are mistaken," he rejoined. "That is merely the idea which ignorant painters and sculptors have of them. The salamander women are beautiful, more beautiful even than any of the others, since they are of a pure element. I had not intended to speak about them, and was passing briefly over the description of these people, since you will see them yourself at your leisure, and with ease if you have the curiosity to do so. You will see their dress, their food, their manners, their customs, and their admirable laws. The beauty of their intellects will charm you even more than that of their bodies, yet one cannot help pitying these unfortunates when they tell one that their souls are mortal, and that they have no hope whatever of eternal enjoyment of a supreme being, of whom they have knowledge and whom they worship reverently. They will tell you that they are composed of the purest portions of the elements in which they dwell, and that they have in them no impurities whatever, since they are made of but one element. Therefore they die only after several centuries, but what is time in comparison with eternity? They must return forever into nothingness. And this thought grieves them deeply, and we have utmost difficulty in consoling them. Our fathers, the philosophers, when speaking with God face to face, complained to him of the unhappiness of the people, and God, whose mercy is boundless, revealed to them that it was not impossible to find a remedy for this evil. He inspired them to the realization that just as man, by the alliance of which he is contracted with God, has been made a participant in divinity, so the sylphs, gnomes, nymphs, and salamanders, by the alliance which they have in that power to contract with man, can become participants in immortality. Thus a nymph or a sylphid becomes immortal and capable of the beatitude in which we aspire when she is so happy as to marry a sage, and a gnome or a sylph ceases to be mortal the moment he espouses one of our daughters. Thence sprang the error of the first centuries of Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Lactantius, Cyprian, Clement of Alexandria, Athenagoras, the Christian philosopher, and of most writers of that period. They had learned that these elementary half-men sought the love of mortal maidens, and therefore imagined that the fall of the angels had come about solely through their suffering themselves to be smitten with love for mortal women. Some gnomes, desirous of becoming immortal, had sought to win the favor of our daughters by bringing them precious stones of which they are a natural guardian, and these authors believed, basing their conclusion upon the book of Enoch, which they did not understand, that these precious stones were snares laid by the enamored angels for the chastity of our women. In the beginning, these sons of heaven, being beloved by the daughters of men, engendered famous giants, and these bad Kabbalists, Josephus and Philo. Almost all Jews are ignorant, and subsequently all the authors I have just mentioned, as well as Origen and Maccabeus, said that they were angels, not knowing that they were sylphs and other elementary people, who under the name of the children of Elohim are distinguished from the children of men. Likewise, that point which the sage Augustine modestly refrained from deciding as to the pursuit of the African women of his time by so-called fauns or satyrs, that also was cleared up by what I have just said concerning the desire to ally themselves with man, which all inhabitants of the elements have, since such an alliance offers the only means whereby they may achieve the immortality which they are not heirs. Our sages take care not to ascribe the fall of the first angel to their love for women, nor do they accord the devil such power over man as would enable them to attribute to him all the amorous intrigues of the nymphs and sylphs wherewith the writings of historians abound. There was never anything criminal in it all. There were sylphs who were striving to become immortal. Far from scandalizing the philosophers, their innocent pursuits appeared so justifiable to us that we have, with one accord, resolved altogether to renounce women and to apply ourselves solely to the immortalization of the nymphs and sylphids. "Oh God," I protested, "what do I hear? To what extent does the, yes, my son, marvel at the extent of the philosophical felicity, instead of women whose feeble allurement fade in a few days and are succeeded by horrible wrinkles. The sage possesses beauties who never grow old, and whom they have the glory of rendering immortal. Imagine the love and gratitude of these invisible mistresses, and the ardor wherewith they strive to please the charitable philosopher who applies himself to their immortalization." "Ah, sir," I once more exclaimed, "I renounce." "Yes, my son," he continued, as before without giving me an opportunity to finish. "Renounce all futile and insipid pleasure, such as one finds in the society of women. The fairest of them is all horrible besides the most insignificant sylphid. No revulsion ever follows our wise love-making. Wretched ignoramus, how greatly you are to be pitied for your inability to taste the pleasure of the philosophers." "Wretched Comte Gabalis," I exclaimed with mingled wrath and compassion, "will you let me tell you once and for all that I renounce this insane wisdom, that I find this visionary philosophy absurd, that I abhor this abominable embracing of phantoms, and that I tremble for you lest one of your pretended sylphids should suddenly carry you off to hell in the midst of your transport, fearing that so good a man as you might at length perceive the madness of this chimerical ardor and repent to so great a crime." "Oh ho," he answered, recoiling 3 steps and looking at me with wrathful eyes. "Woe to you, intractable spirit that you are!" His behavior frightened me, I confess, but what was infinitely worse, as he went away from me, I saw him take a paper from his pocket. I caught a glimpse of it from a distance and perceived it to be covered with characters which I could not quite make out. He read it attentively, seemed vexed, and kept muttering to himself. I believed that he was evoking spirits to compass my ruin, and I somewhat repented my rash zeal. If I escaped from this adventure, I kept saying to myself, no more Kabbalist for me. I was keeping my eyes fixed upon him as on a judge about to condemn me to death, when I saw his countenance regain its serenity. "It is hard for you to kick against the pricks," he said, smiling and rejoining me. "You are a chosen vessel. Heaven has destined you to be the greatest Kabbalist of your time. Here is the map of your horoscope which cannot be at fault. If it does not come to pass now and through my mediation, it will at the good pleasure of your retrograde Saturn." "Ah, if I am to become a sage," said I, "it will never be saved through the mediation of the great Gabalist, but to be plain with you, I sadly fear that you will find it hard to bend me to this philosophical love-making. Can it be, he replied, that you are such a poor natural philosopher as not to be persuaded of the existence of these peoples? I hardly know, I answered, but I think that I should always fancy them to be merely hobgoblins in disguise. And will you ever believe more implicitly in the nurse of your childhood than in your native reason, than in Plato, Pythagoras, Celsus, Pallas, Proclus, Porphyr, Iamblichus, Plotinus, Trismegistus, Nollius, Dornfy, Flood, than in the great Philip Aurelius, Theoratus Bombast, Periclesis of Honeman, and all the members of our order? I would believe you, sir, I responded, as much as more than all of them. But, my dear sir, could you not arrange with your fellow initiates that I should not be compelled to devote myself to these young ladies of the elements? Alas, she answered, you are undoubtedly a free agent, and one does not love unless one wishes to do so. Few sages, however, have been able to resist their charms. Nevertheless, there have been some who have reserved themselves wholly for greater things, as you will in time know, and who have not been willing to do the nymphs this honor. Then I will be one of their number, I replied, as I should never be willing to waste time in the ceremonies which I have heard a certain prelate say one must practice in order to hold communion with such spirits. That prelate did not know what he was talking about, said the Comte, for you will one day see that these are not spirits, and furthermore no sage ever makes use either of ceremonies or of superstitious rites to get in touch with spirits, any more than he does in order to commune with the people of whom we are speaking. The Kabbalist acts solely according to the principles of nature, and if strange worlds, symbols, and circumlocutions are sometimes found in our books, they are only used to conceal the principle of natural philosophy from the ignorant. Admire the simplicity of nature in all her marvelous works, and in the simplicity a harmony and concert so great, so exact, and so essential that it will compel you in spite of yourself to relinquish your ideal fantasies. What I am about to tell you we teach those of our disciples whom we are not willing unreservedly to admit into the sanctuary of nature, yet whom we in no wise wish to deprive of the society of elemental people, because of the compassion which we have for these same people. As you may perhaps already have grasped, the salamanders are composed of the most subtile portions of the sphere of fire, fused together and organized by the action of the universal fire, of which I will discourse to you some day. It is called the universal fire because it is the inherent cause of every movement in nature. Likewise, the sylphs are composed of the purest atoms of the air, the nymphs of the most subtile essence of the water, and the gnomes of the finest particles of the earth. Adam was closely related to these perfect creatures, for being created out of all that was purest in the four elements, he combined in himself the perfection of these four races of people, and was their natural king. As you will learn later, however, the moment of his sin had precipitated him into the dregs of the elements. The harmony was disturbed, and there could be no longer be any relationship between him, gross and impure as he had become, and these pure and subtile beings. So how remedy this evil? How restrain the lute and recover that lost sovereignty? O nature, why art thou so little studied? Do you not understand, my son, how easy nature finds it to restore to man the estate which he has lost? Alas, sir, I answered, I am very ignorant concerning all these faculties of nature to which you refer. Nevertheless, it is exceedingly easy to become well informed about them, he rejoined. If we wish to recover empire over the salamanders, we must purify and exalt the element of fire which is in us, and raise the pitch of that relaxed string. We have only to concentrate the fire of the world in a globe of crystal, by means of a concave mirror, and this is the art which all the ancients religiously concealed, and which the divine Theophratus discovered. A solar powder is formed in this globe, which being purified in itself, and freed from any admixture of the other elements, and being prepared according to the art, becomes in a very short time supremely fitted to exalt the fire which is in us, and to make us become, as it were, an igneous nature. Thereafter the inhabitants of the sphere of fire are our inferiors, and enraptured to see our mutual harmony re-established, and that we are again drawing near to them. They have as much friendship for us as for their own kindred, and all the respect which they owe to the image and lieutenant of their Creator. They pay us every attention that they bethink themselves of through their desire to obtain from us the immortality which they do not possess. It is true that they live a very long time, since they are more subtle than the people of the other elements. Hence they are in no hurry to exact immortality from the sages. If the aversion that you have evinced should prove lasting, my son, you might be able to adapt yourself to a salamander. Perhaps it would never speak to you of that which you so greatly fear. It would not be thus with the sylphs, gnomes, and nymphs, as they live for less time. They have more to do with us, so their familiarity is easy to obtain. One is only to seal a goblet full of compressed air, water, or earth, and leave it exposed to the sun for a month. Then separate the elements scientifically, which is particularly easy to do with water and earth. It is marvelous what a magnet for attracting nymphs, sylphs, and gnomes each one of these purified elements is. After taking the smallest possible quantity every day for some month, one sees in the air the flying commonwealth of the sylphs. The nymphs come in crowds to the shore. The guardians of the treasures parade their riches. Thus, without symbols, without ceremony, without barbaric words, one becomes ruler over these people. They exact no worship whatever from the sage, whose superiority to themselves they fully recognize. Thus vulnerable nature teaches her children to repair the elements by means of the elements. Thus harmony is reestablished. Thus man recovers his natural empire, and can do all things in the elements without the devil and without black art. Thus you see, my son, the sages are more innocent than you imagine. Have you no answer to make me? I marvel at you, sir, said I, and I am beginning to fear lest you should make me into a distiller. Ah, God forbid, my child. Your horoscope does not destine you for such nonsense as that. On the contrary, I forbid you to trifle away your time over it. I have told you that the sages only teach such things to those that have no wish to admit to their own company. You will have all these things and infinitely more glorious and more desirable advantages through philosophic procedures, which are quite different in character. I have only described these methods to make you see the innocence of this philosophy and to allay your panic terrors. Thanks be to God, sir, I answered. I no longer have so much fear as I had this afternoon. And although I have not yet made up my mind to this arrangement with the salamanders which you propose, I cannot help being curious to learn how you have discovered that the nymphs and sylphs die. Verily, he replied, they tell us so, and moreover we actually see them die. How is it possible you can see them die, I questioned, when your alliance renders them immortal? That would be a point well made, he said, if the number of sages equal the number of these peoples. Besides, there are many among them who prefer to die rather than to run the risk of becoming immortal, and of being as unhappy as they see the demons to be. It is the devil who inspires these sentiments in them, for he leaves no stone unturned to prevent these poor creatures from becoming immortal through alliance with us. So regard this aversion of yours, my son, as a very pernicious temptation, and a most uncharitable impulse, and you ought so to regard it. Furthermore, as to the death of the nymphs and sylphs of which you speak, who compel the oracle of Apollo to say, as Porphyr reports, that all those who used to speak through the oracle were mortal like himself. And what, think you, was the significance of that cry, which was heard throughout the coast of Italy, and which struck such terror in the hearts of all who chanced to be upon the sea? Great Pan is dead. It was the people of the air who were announcing to the people of the water that the chief and oldest of the sylphs had just died. It seems to me, I remarked, that at the time the cry was heard, the world was worshipping Pan and the nymphs. Were then these gentlemen, whose fellowship you extol to me, the false gods of the pagans? That is true, my son, he answered. The sages are far from believing the devil ever had power to make himself worshipped. He is too wretched and too weak ever to have such pleasure and authority. But he has had power to persuade these hosts of the elements to show themselves to men, and to cause temples to be erected in their honor. And by virtue of the natural dominion which each one of these peoples has over the element in which it dwells, they keep troubling the air and sea, shaking the earth, and scattering the fire of Bevan at their own good pleasure. Thus they had little difficulty in causing themselves to be mistaken for divinities, so long as the sovereign being neglected the salvation of the nation. Yet the devil did not derive from his mischief all the advantage he had hoped. For from that time it changed that as Pan, the nymphs, and other elementary people had found a means of exchanging this traffic in worship for a traffic of love. You must needs remember that among the ancients, Pan was held to be the king of the so-called incubus gods, who ardently courted maidens. Many of the pagans escape from the devil and will not burn in hell. "I do not understand you, sir," I replied. "You take pains not to understand me," he continued mirthfully in a mocking tone. "This is beyond your comprehension, and would likewise be beyond that of all your doctors, for they have no idea as to what glorious natural philosophy is. Here is the great mystery of all that part of philosophy which has to do with the elements, and which, if you have any self-esteem, will surely remove the very unphilosophic repugnance which you have been evincing all day long. Know then, my son, and be in no hurry to divulge this great arcanum to any unworthy ignoramus. Know that even as the sylphs acquire an immortal soul through the alliance which they contract with men who are predestined, so men who have no right whatever to eternal glory, those unfortunates by whom immortality is but a fatal advantage, for whom the Messiah was not sent." "Ah, so you gentlemen of the Kabbalist are Jansenists, then," I interposed. "We do not know what Jansenism is, my child," he answered brusquely, "and we scorn to inform ourselves to wherein consists the difference in the various sects and religions wherewith the ignorant are infatuated. We ourselves hold to the ancient religion of our fathers, the philosophers, concerning which I must one day instruct you. But to resume the thread of our discourse, those men whose melancholy immortality would be but an eternal misfortune, those unhappy children whom the sovereign Father has neglected, have still the resource of becoming immortal by allaying themselves with the elementary people. Thus you see the sages run no hazard as to eternity. If predestined, they have the pleasure of quitting the prison of this body, of leading to heaven the sylphid or nymph, whom they have immortalized. On the other hand, if not predestined, marriage with the sylphid renders their soul mortal and delivers them from the horror of the second death." Footnote: Observe that the position implied, that such permanent death is to be preferred to damnation, is flatly contradicted by the Comte in the fifth Discourse. This, though, is likely deliberate on the part of the author. For the book to have worked as satire, the doctrine put into the mouth of the Comte needed to bear at least some relation to opinions current among Parisian occultists of the time, but it was not necessary that they be consistent. End of footnote. Thus the devil beheld all those pagans who had allied themselves with nymphs escaping his clutches. Thus the sages, or the friends of the sages, to whom God inspires us to communicate any one of the four elementary secrets, which I have well nigh taught you, may be set free from the peril of damnation. "Truth to tell," I exclaimed, not daring to put him into a bad humor again, and deeming it expedient to postpone fully telling him my sentiment until he should have revealed to me all the secrets of his Kabbalah, which, from this sample, I judged to be exceedingly odd and creative. "Truth to tell, you carry wisdom to very great length, and you were right in saying that this would be beyond the comprehension of all of our doctors. I even believe that would be beyond the comprehension of all of our magistrates as well, and that if they could discover who these people who escaped the devil by this method, as ignorance is ever unjust, they would take sides with the devil against these fugitives and would use them ill. For that reason, said the Comte, I have enjoined secrecy upon you, and I solemnly adjure you to maintain it. Your judges are strange folk. They condemn a most innocent action as being the basis of crime. What barbarism it was to condemn those two priests, whom the Prince de la Mirande knew to be burned. Each of whom had his sylph for the space of 40 years. What inhumanity it was to condemn to death Jean Hervener, who had labored to immortalize a gnome for 36 years. And what ignorance on the part of Bodin to call her a sorceress, and to make her amorous intrigues a justification of the popular misconception regarding the so-called sorcerers, in a book as extravagant as the Republic is rational. But it is late, and I am unmindful of the fact that you have not yet dined. You are speaking for yourself, sir, said I. For my part, I could listen to you until tomorrow without inconvenience. Ah, as for myself, he rejoined, smiling and walking towards the gate, evidently you do not in the least know what philosophy is. The sages only eat for pleasure and never for necessity. I had quite the opposite idea of sageness, I replied. I suppose that the sage should only eat to satisfy necessity. You are mistaken, said the Comte. How long do you think we sages can go without eating? How should I know, said I. Moses and Elias fasted 40 days. No doubt you sages fast for some days less. Oh, what a mighty endeavor that would be, he answered. The most learned man who ever lived, the divine, the almost to be worshipped Periclesis, affirms that he has seen many sages who have fasted for 20 years without eating anything whatsoever. He himself, before being acknowledged monarch of the empire of wisdom, whose scepter we have just accorded him, was pleased to essay living for several years by taking only 1/2 scruple of solar quintessence. And if you wish to have the pleasure of making anyone live without eating, you have only to prepare the earth as I have indicated, that it may be prepared for the purpose of securing the partnership of the gnomes. This earth applied to the navel, and renewed when it is too dry, makes it possible for one to dispense with eating and drinking without the slightest inconvenience whatsoever, even as the voracious Paracelsus relates that he himself demonstrated during 6 months. But the use of the Catholic Kabbalistic medicine liberates us in the very best way from the importune necessities to which nature subjects the ignorant. We eat only when it pleases us to do so, and every superfluity of food vanishes by unconscious transpiration, and we are never ashamed of being men. Then he fell silent, perceiving that we were within hearing of our servants, and we went to the village to take a slender repast, as is the custom of the heroes of philosophy. End of Discourse.